The notification arrived while I was halfway through chapter 23 of a thriller I'd been saving for this exact moment. 3 days into my first real vacation in 18 months, and my phone decided to remind me why I'd needed it in the first place. The beach stretched out before me, waves rolling in with that hypnotic rhythm that's supposed to lower your blood pressure. Mine was about to spike. One buzz, sharp and insistent against the wooden armrest of my beach chair. I glanced down. A text from Matthew Cross, the CEO. The man who wore his MBA like a crown and his entitlement like cologne. Too much of both. Evelyn. Change of plans. Don't bother coming back Monday. No context. No explanation. Just 14 words that somehow managed to be both cowardly and cruel. I read it 3 times not because I didn't understand but because I was cataloging the audacity. Firing someone via text while they're on approved vacation wasn't just unprofessional. It was performance art of the most pathetic variety. I didn't throw my phone. Didn't scream into the ocean like some melodramatic protagonist in a beach read. Instead, I set down my book, stood up from my chair and walked slowly back to the rental cottage. My bare feet left prints in the sand that the tide would erase within minutes. Temporary marks from someone passing through. How poetic. Inside, I grabbed a glass of iced tea from the mini fridge. The kind with real sugar, not that artificial garbage Matthew always stocked in the office kitchen because it was better for team wellness. I took a long sip, savoring the cold sweetness, then opened my laptop. The file I needed was labeled simply, contingency_protocol_final.pdf. I'd written it 3 years ago, back when Matthew was still pretending to value collaboration and I was still naive enough to believe him. The document was 47 pages of legal precision, drafted after the lawyers tried to water down my intellectual property protections into meaningless corporate speak. They'd wanted loopholes. I'd wanted certainty. Guess who won that negotiation? Section 4, subsection C. The clause that would become Matthew's personal nightmare, though he'd never bothered to read it. To be fair, he never read anything that didn't have his name in bold at the top. Upon termination of employment without documented cause, all licensing rights to the Cascade Network Protocol version 3.8, including but not limited to runtime architecture, authentication modules, data synchronization frameworks, API gateways, and all derivative implementations, shall immediately revert to the original author and licensor Adeline Keaton, operating under Keaton Solutions LLC. Effective immediately. No grace period. No transition window. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. I'd registered the protocol under my own limited liability company before I ever joined the startup. Back when it was just Matthew, his co-founder who'd since been pushed out, and a dream of disrupting the project management software space. They'd needed something nobody else had. A way to synchronize complex workflows across multiple platforms in real time without the lag, crashes, or data corruption that plagued every competitor. I'd built it. Alone. 6 months of late nights, cold pizza, and the kind of obsessive problem-solving that makes you forget what day it is. The Cascade protocol wasn't just code. It was architecture. It was art. And I'd licensed it to them. Not sold it. Licensed it. Smart like a fox who builds her den with an escape tunnel. I pulled up the license management portal, the back-end system that controlled access to the protocol. My hands were steady as I typed in my credentials. No hesitation. No second-guessing. This wasn't impulsive. This was mechanical. The natural consequence of Matthew's decision, executing itself like a well-written function. The dashboard loaded. Green indicators across the board. 83,000 active connections. 412 servers running the protocol. Real-time sync managing everything from file uploads to task assignments to billing calculations. The entire platform, the thing that made their app worth $150 million in valuation, depended on this. On me. I navigated to the termination triggers. There were 3 safety protocols I'd built in, each one requiring manual confirmation. The system was designed to prevent accidents, to ensure that if this nuclear option ever got activated, it was deliberate. First confirmation. Verify employment status terminated without cause. I clicked yes. The text message was all the evidence I needed. Second confirmation. Acknowledge automatic license revocation per Section 4, subsection C. Yes. Third confirmation. Understand that reverting access will result in immediate service disruption. This action cannot be undone remotely. My cursor hovered over the button for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to imagine Matthew's face when the report started coming in. Long enough to picture the chaos in the engineering team's Slack channels. Long enough to feel absolutely nothing resembling guilt. I clicked yes. The screen updated. Red text appeared in crisp sans serif font. License revoked. All protocol access terminated. Timestamp: 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I closed the laptop and went back outside. The ocean was still there, still beautiful, still completely indifferent to the digital wildfire I'd just started 400 miles north. I settled back into my beach chair, picked up my book and found my place. Chapter 23. The detective was just about to discover who the real killer was. I already knew how my story ended. The first tremors would have hit around 3 p.m., right when the West Coast team was logging in after lunch and the East Coast developers were deep in afternoon stand-up meetings. I didn't need to be there to know exactly how it played out. I'd architected the system. I knew every failure point, every dependency, every cascading effect. The Cascade Protocol wasn't just a sync engine. It was the central nervous system. Kill it and the body goes into shock. Task assignments would stop propagating. File uploads would hang at 99%. Comments would disappear into the void. Users would see their screens freeze mid-action, that awful spinning wheel of death appearing where smooth functionality used to be. Some would refresh. Some would log out and back in. None of it would help. Because the problem wasn't in their browser or their connection. The problem was that the engine they'd built their entire platform on top of had just been legally repossessed. I imagined the first confused Slack message. Probably from one of the junior developers, someone too new to remember what life was like before the Cascade Protocol stabilized everything. Hey, is anyone else seeing sync errors? Then another. Yeah, getting timeout exceptions on the task API. Then a dozen more, all within minutes, each one more panicked than the last. The senior engineers would dive into logs first. They'd see the authentication failures, the rejected handshakes, the cryptic error messages about invalid license tokens. Someone would eventually check the protocol status page, the internal dashboard that showed the health of my system. And they'd see it. Bright red banner across the top. License status, revoked. That's when someone would say it. The question nobody wanted to ask but everyone was thinking. Wait, if Adeline got fired, doesn't the license revert back to her? Silence. Digital silence, which is somehow louder than the regular kind. Then someone would pull up my employment contract. They'd find Section 4. They'd read subsection C. They'd realize that Matthew had just pulled the pin on a grenade and thrown it at his own company. My phone buzzed. I looked down. 5 missed calls from Matthew. 3 from the CTO, a guy named Elliot who'd always been decent to me but not decent enough to warn me about the firing. 2 from someone in HR whose name I'd already forgotten. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Let them sit in the uncertainty for a while. Let them wonder if I was even seeing their messages or if I'd thrown my phone into the ocean and disappeared into some off-grid paradise where their panic couldn't reach me. The truth was simpler. I was reading my book, sipping my tea and occasionally checking the indirect metrics I still had access to. Website traffic monitoring. Social media mentions. The public-facing status page that was probably getting refreshed 10,000 times per minute by increasingly angry users. By 4 p.m., the status page had changed from all systems operational to investigating service disruptions. By 4:30, it was major outage team investigating. By 5 it was a PR nightmare. Twitter was erupting. Reddit threads were multiplying like bacteria. Users who'd paid for premium subscriptions were demanding refunds. Enterprise clients were threatening to invoke their SLA penalties. The app's rating in the iOS store had dropped from 4.7 stars to 2.1 in under 2 hours. Someone had found my LinkedIn profile. The messages started flooding in. Recruiters. Journalists. Former colleagues sending solidarity emojis and thinly veiled requests for gossip. One message from a competitor's CTO that simply said, "I'm guessing you're available. Name your price." I marked them all as unread and went back to my book. The detective had just figured out that the killer wasn't who everyone thought. Turns out the quiet one had been dangerous all along. The sun was setting when I finally checked my email. 94 new messages, and that was just in the past 3 hours. Most were automated alerts from systems I no longer had access to. Some were frantic messages from the engineering team. A few were from users somehow tracking down my corporate email address to ask what the hell was happening. But the one that caught my attention was from Lydia Forrester, the CFO. Unlike Matthew, Lydia actually understood how businesses worked. She knew the difference between revenue and profit, between growth and sustainability, between an asset and a liability. Subject line: we need to talk. Urgently. The email itself was refreshingly honest. Adeline, I just found out about your termination. I was not consulted and I don't agree with how it was handled. I've reviewed your contract. I understand the situation we're in. I'm not asking you to fix this out of loyalty or friendship. I'm asking what it would take to negotiate a path forward. This is a business conversation. Please call me when you can. No blame. No begging. Just acknowledgement and an opening for negotiation. I respected that. Lydia had always been the adult in the room, the one who asked hard questions during board meetings while Matthew performed his Steve Jobs cosplay routine. She'd been the one who'd approved my salary increases when Matthew complained they were above market rate. She'd been the one who'd insisted on formal IP documentation when Matthew wanted to keep everything loose and founder-friendly. If she'd been CEO, I probably wouldn't be sitting on a beach watching her company burn. But she wasn't CEO. Matthew was. And Matthew had made his choice. I didn't call her. Not yet. Instead, I opened a new document and started typing. Not a ransom note or an ultimatum. A terms sheet. Clean, professional, the kind of thing you'd present in an actual business negotiation. Proposed licensing reinstatement, terms for consideration. Base consulting rate, $18,000 per hour minimum engagement. 10 hours, non-negotiable. Payment terms. 100% advance payment, non-refundable additional conditions. Written apology from Matthew Cross, published internally. Formal acknowledgement of intellectual property ownership. Permanent seat on technical advisory board with veto power over infrastructure decisions. Equity compensation. 2% fully vested common stock. Removal of any non-compete or IP assignment clauses from all company documentation. Public correction of any statements attributing the Cascade Protocol to company R&D. I saved it but didn't send it. Not to Lydia. Not to Matthew. Not to anyone. Because here's what they didn't understand yet. I didn't need their money. I'd been living below my means for years, saving aggressively, investing carefully. I had runway. They didn't. This wasn't about compensation. This was about respect. About making sure that every engineer who ever got fired via text while on vacation would have a reference point. A cautionary tale. A reminder that quiet people aren't powerless people. They're just people who know when to speak. My phone rang. Matthew again. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message on speaker while I watched the sky turn from orange to purple. Adeline. Matthew. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The text. I was trying to give you flexibility. Time to explore other opportunities. This wasn't, we can talk about this. The protocol situation is complicated, and I'm sure we can work something out that's fair for everyone. Just call me back. Please. I deleted it halfway through and poured myself a glass of wine. The expensive kind I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified.by morning, the internet had done what the internet does best. Investigative chaos. Someone had dug up my old GitHub contributions. Another person had found a podcast interview from 2 years ago where I'd briefly explained how real-time synchronization worked. A particularly dedicated Reddit sleuth had cross-referenced the company's patent filings with my name and discovered that I was listed as the sole inventor on 4 separate patents. The narrative was writing itself, and it wasn't kind to Matthew. Startup CEO fires the engineer who built everything. How one text message destroyed a $150 million valuation. The woman behind the code they took for granted. One article from a tech journalist I actually respected had done real research. She'd interviewed former employees, reviewed public documents, and pieced together a timeline of my contributions versus the company's public story. The headline was perfect. She was called a team member. She was actually the architect. The article quoted an anonymous developer. We all knew. Everyone on the engineering team knew that without Adeline the whole thing was smoke and mirrors. Management just never wanted to admit it publicly. I was sitting on the cottage deck, coffee in hand, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Local area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Ms. Keaton? This is Nathan Reeves from Catalyst Ventures. Catalyst. One of the biggest venture capital firms in the country. The kind of firm that turns startups into unicorns and founders into billionaires. I'm listening, I said. I'll be direct. We've been watching the situation unfold with your former employer. We've also been doing our homework on you. Your protocol, your patents, your architecture. We're impressed. Very impressed. What would it take to have a conversation about what you're building next? I'm not building anything next, I said. I'm on vacation. He laughed. Actually laughed. Miss Keaton, people like you don't stop building. You're just choosing what to build and who to build it with. We'd like to be on that list. When you're ready, of course. No pressure. But when you are ready, I'd love to buy you dinner. Name the city. I told him I'd think about it and ended the call. 3 more came in over the next hour. 2 from other VC firms, 1 from a headhunter representing a company I'd actually heard of and respected. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Flattery, acknowledgement of my leverage, and a barely disguised eagerness to be in business with me. None of them mentioned Matthew's company. They didn't need to. Everyone could see the writing on the wall. Meanwhile, my inbox was becoming a documentary of corporate collapse in real time. An automated alert from the App Store. Rating dropped to 1.8 stars. A news alert. Major project management platform faces extended outage. A leaked screenshot from the company's internal Slack. Legal says we can't compel her to fix anything. The license is airtight. And then finally the message I'd been waiting for. From Matthew.Crossett.company.com subject. I'm sorry. Madeline, I screwed up. I screwed up badly. I let ego and pressure and a dozen bad decisions lead me to make the worst one. You deserved better. The company deserved better. I thought I was making a strategic move, and I realize now I was just being an idiot. I don't expect forgiveness, but I am asking for help. Not for me. For the 200 people who work here who had nothing to do with this, who are scared they're going to lose their jobs because of my mistake. Tell me what it takes. I'll do it. I read it twice. Then I opened my terms document, attached it to a reply, and added 1 sentence. These terms are non-negotiable. You have 24 hours to respond. I hit send and closed my laptop. The book was calling. The detective was about to make an arrest and I didn't want to miss it. The response came in 14 hours. Not from Matthew but from Lydia with Matthew CC'd. Adeline, we accept your terms with the following confirmations. Payment of $180,000 has been wired to the account you specified. Matthew has drafted the internal apology attached. Board has approved your advisory position and equity grant. Legal is preparing the documentation revisions. We understand you have no obligation to us and we're grateful you're willing to consider any path forward. When you're ready, we're ready. Lydia. The attached apology was surprisingly genuine. Either Matthew had grown a conscience or Lydia had held a gun to his head. Maybe both. To the entire team, I made a serious error in judgment that has put our company and your livelihoods at risk. Adeline Keaton was not just another engineer. She was the architect of the technology that powers everything we do. I failed to recognize that, failed to value her appropriately, and terminated her employment without proper consideration or respect. This failure is mine alone. I've asked Adeline to consider helping us recover, and she has agreed to terms that are more than fair given the circumstances. Moving forward, we will be implementing new protocols to ensure that key technical contributors are never again treated as disposable. I'm sorry to Adeline and I'm sorry to all of you. Matthew, it would get leaked. They always did. But that was Matthew's problem now, not mine. I opened my laptop, logged into the license portal and stared at the reactivation controls. 10 hours of consulting. That's what I'd agreed to. I could drag it out, make them suffer a bit longer, but that wasn't the play. The play was to show that I could fix in hours what they couldn't fix in days. Besides, I had other plans forming. Better plans. I initiated the license reactivation sequence. Green status indicators started appearing across the dashboard. Within minutes, the Cascade protocol was live again, authentication flowing, data syncing, the platform breathing. I didn't tell them right away. Let them discover it organically, Let them feel the relief wash over the engineering team as error messages turned into success logs. Let them remember what it felt like to have their infrastructure work properly. Then I sent a single message to the engineering team Slack. I still had read-only access and someone had apparently forgotten to revoke it. Protocol restored. 9.5 hours consulting time remaining. Use it wisely. The response was immediate. Not from Matthew but from the developers. The people who'd actually understood what I did. Thank you. You're a legend. We never wanted you gone. Please tell me you're coming back. I wasn't coming back. But I didn't tell them that yet. I spent the remaining vacation days actually relaxing. No laptop. No email. Just books, beach walks, and the kind of deep sleep that comes from finally releasing years of accumulated tension. On my last day I sat on the deck and drafted a new document. Not a terms sheet or a contract. A vision document. The kind of thing you write when you're ready to build something that matters. Project Cornerstone. A new architecture for collaborative infrastructure. I sketched out the basics. A modular protocol suite that companies could license, yes, but with built-in protections. Automated fairness clauses. Usage transparency. Attribution requirements. The kind of technology that couldn't be weaponized against its creators because the creators maintained control by design. It wasn't just about preventing another Matthew Cross situation. It was about changing the power dynamics of tech infrastructure itself. My phone buzzed. A text from Alana Durant, a former colleague who'd left the company 6 months earlier after being passed over for a promotion that went to someone less qualified but more culture fit. Heard you burned it all down. Proud of you. If you're building something new, count me in. Then another. From Deepak Sutton, the back-end specialist who'd been laid off during a restructuring that somehow only affected the senior engineers with high salaries. Saw the news. I'm available. Let's talk. And another. From Caroline Wright, the QA lead who'd quit after Matthew ignored her security warnings until they turned into actual breaches. You were always the only reason that place worked. I'm freelancing now, but if you need someone who gives a damn about quality, call me. I smiled. Not the smug satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet recognition of possibility. I had leverage now. Not just technical leverage but social proof. Every developer who'd ever been undervalued or overlooked or fired for someone else's mistakes had just watched me demonstrate exactly what happens when you treat people as disposable. I was their cautionary tale. Their patron saint. Their proof that silence isn't weakness. By the time I packed up to leave the cottage, I had 12 messages from former colleagues, 5 term sheets from investors, and 3 acquisition offers from companies that wanted to license my protocol. I had exactly 0 interest in the acquisition offers. Building a company just to sell it felt like building a house just to demolish it. Pointless. But the messages from former colleagues? Those mattered. Those were the foundation. Back home I spent 3 days doing nothing but sleeping, organizing, and thinking. My apartment felt different. Lighter. Like I'd left something heavy at the beach and forgotten to pick it back up. On the 4th day I sent out a single email. Not to Matthew or Lydia or any of the venture capitalists who were still courting me. To 6 people. The ones who'd reached out, the ones who'd been burned, the ones who knew what it meant to build something that mattered. Subject: interested in doing it right this time? We've all worked in places that treated us like interchangeable components. That took credit for our work. That fired us when convenient and panicked when they realized they couldn't function without us. I'm building something different. Not a startup. Not a disruptor. Just a company that builds infrastructure the right way, treats people the right way, and maintains control over what we create. If that sounds interesting, let's talk. No VC pressure. No growth at all costs mandates. Just solid engineering, fair ownership, and the freedom to say no to people who don't respect what we do. Adeline. 5 responded within an hour. The 6th called me directly. When do we start? Lana asked. 2 weeks, I said. I want to get the legal structure right first. I'll see proper IP assignments to individuals, profit sharing from day one. I'm not building another situation where one person can destroy everything. You're building a worker cooperative, she said. I'm building something sustainable, I corrected. Call it whatever you want. We spent the next week hammering out the details. Not in a conference room or a co-working space, but in my living room with actual coffee and actual conversation. No performance. No posturing. Just 6 people who knew their worth and refused to compromise it again. The company structure was simple. Each founding member owned equal shares. Decisions required consensus. IP created by the team belonged to the team, licensed out but never sold. Profits split evenly after expenses and reinvestment. We called it Cornerstone Systems. Not flashy. Not clever. Just accurate. Our first client was the competitor who'd reached out during the beach vacation. They needed a synchronization protocol that wasn't controlled by a single vendor. We built them something modular, something they could customize, something that came with ironclad licensing terms that protected both parties. The contract was worth $400,000. Split 6 ways after expenses, that was $58,000 each for 3 months of work. The second client came from a referral. Then a third. Then a venture fund reached out, not to invest in us, but to hire us to audit their portfolio company's infrastructure. By month 6 we were profitable. By month 9 we were turning down work. Not because we wanted to create artificial scarcity, but because we'd built something rare. A company that valued sustainability over scale, craftsmanship over speed, people over growth metrics. I didn't hear from Matthew for 5 months. Then out of nowhere an email appeared in my inbox. Subject: Congratulations, Adeline, I've been following Cornerstone from a distance. You're doing exactly what I should have let you do from the beginning. Building the right way. I don't expect a response, but I wanted you to know that what happened was the best thing that could have happened. Not for me, I stepped down as CEO last month, but for you. You outgrew us before we had the wisdom to recognize it. I hope you're building something that makes you proud. Matthew. I read it once, then archived it without responding. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt. They just need to be acknowledged as burned. My phone rang. Lydia. Did you see Matthew's email? She asked. I did. He meant it, you know. The apology. The recognition. He's different now. Humbler. That's good for him, I said. How's the company? Surviving. New CEO is more pragmatic. Less charismatic, but actually listens to people. We're rebuilding the engineering team properly this time. Fair compensation, clear IP policies, respect for technical expertise. I'm glad. Would you ever consider coming back? Not as an employee. As a partner. We could license Cornerstone's technology, work together on joint development. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. But if you ever need an audit or a consulting engagement, we're available. Standard rates apply. She laughed. Of course they do. Take care, Adeline. You too, Lydia. I hung up and looked around my home office. 2 monitors, a mechanical keyboard that clicked with satisfying precision, and a whiteboard covered in architectural diagrams for our next project. On the wall I'd framed something. Not an award or a patent or a press clipping. Just a printout of Section 4, subsection C from my old contract. The paragraph that changed everything. Underneath it I'd added a handwritten note. Read the fine print. Then write your own. Alana knocked on the door frame. Client call in 10. You ready? Always, I said. She paused. You know what I respect most about how you handled the Matthew situation? What? You didn't destroy him. You just walked away and built something better. That's real power. I smiled. Revenge is exhausting. Success is efficient. We walked to the conference room together. 6 equal partners building infrastructure that mattered on our own terms. The protocol ran clean. The code was elegant. The business was sustainable. And nobody, not Matthew, not venture capital, not market pressure, not ego could take that away from us. Because this time we'd written the terms. Every single one. 18 months later. The conference invitation arrived via email. Tech Summit, one of the industry's major events. They wanted me to keynote. Topic: Building sustainable tech infrastructure in the age of disposable engineering. I accepted. Not because I needed the platform, but because the message needed to be heard. The morning of the talk I stood backstage watching the venue fill. 3,000 engineers, executives, founders. The people who built the industry and the people who profited from it. My phone buzzed. A text from Caroline. Kick us. Show them what actual engineering looks like. I smiled and pocketed the phone. When I walked onto the stage, the lights were bright enough to make the audience disappear. But I didn't need to see them. I knew who they were. People like I'd been. Talented, undervalued, tired of being treated like replaceable parts in someone else's machine. 3 years ago, I was fired via text message while on vacation. My boss didn't think I was important enough for a phone call or a meeting. He thought I was replaceable. Pause. Let them feel it. He was wrong. And the cost of that mistake was $150 million in valuation and a company that barely survived. I clicked to the next slide. Section 4, subsection C. The clause that started everything. This is the paragraph that saved my career and destroyed his. Not because it was revenge. Because it was leverage. I'd protected myself legally before I ever needed protection. I'd built something they needed more than I needed them. And when they treated me as disposable, I showed them exactly what disposing of me cost. Another slide. The Cornerstone Systems logo. I'm not here to tell you to blow up your companies. I'm here to tell you to own your value. Document your contributions. Protect your intellectual property. Build leverage before you need it. And when someone treats you as replaceable, let them discover the hard way that they're wrong. The applause was immediate. Not polite conference clapping but real, sustained applause. The kind that comes from recognition. I spent the next 40 minutes walking through practical strategies. How to structure IP agreements. How to document technical contributions. How to negotiate from a position of strength. How to build companies that value people over personas. During Q&A, someone asked the question I knew was coming. Do you regret how you handled the situation with your former employer? I didn't hesitate. No. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that it took a crisis for them to understand what they'd lost. But I don't regret protecting myself or enforcing my rights. That's not revenge. That's consequence. Another question. What would you say to Matthew Cross if he was here today? I smiled. He's here. Third row left side. The audience turned. Matthew raised his hand slightly, acknowledgement without drama. And I'd tell him the same thing I told him in an email 18 months ago. Thank you. Getting fired was the best thing that could have happened. Not because I wanted revenge but because I was finally free to build something that mattered. On my own terms. Matthew nodded. Small gesture but visible. After the keynote I didn't rush to leave. I stayed for the networking sessions, the hallway conversations, the quiet moments where engineers pulled me aside to say thank you. One woman, maybe 25, said it best. I just negotiated my contract differently because of your story. I protected my code. They tried to push back and I almost caved. Then I thought about what you did and I held firm. They signed it. That's when I knew the talk had mattered. Not because I'd destroyed Matthew's company or secured my own success, but because I'd shown others that they could protect themselves. That silence wasn't surrender. That documentation was power. That you didn't need to scream to be heard. You just needed to build something they couldn't function without and make sure they knew you controlled it. 2 years later, Cornerstone Systems had grown to 15 people. Still small, still deliberate, still profitable. We'd turned down 3 acquisition offers and 2 rounds of venture funding. We didn't need external capital. We needed autonomy. Our client list included companies I actually respected. Businesses that valued infrastructure, understood technical debt, and treated engineers as partners rather than resources. We developed a reputation for building things that worked, that scaled, that didn't collapse when one person left. I was in the office reviewing architectural specs for a new protocol when my phone buzzed. Unknown number but the area code was familiar. Adeline Keaton. Miss Keaton, this is Rachel Chin from the Federal Trade Commission. I sat up straighter. The FTC didn't call unless something serious was happening. We're conducting an investigation into anti-competitive practices in the project management software industry. Your name came up repeatedly in interviews. We understand you're familiar with licensing practices and technical infrastructure. Would you be willing to serve as an expert consultant? I asked for details. They sent documentation under NDA. What I read made me angry in a way I hadn't felt since that text message 3 years ago. Multiple companies were using licensing agreements to lock engineers into unethical terms. Non-competes that prevented people from working in their field. IP assignments that claimed ownership of code written on personal time. Termination clauses that left developers with nothing after years of contributions. Everything I'd fought against systematized across the industry. I agreed to consult. Not for the money, though the government's consulting rates were surprisingly fair. But because this was bigger than me. This was about changing the system that had tried to chew me up and spit me out. The investigation took 14 months. I provided technical analysis, reviewed contracts, explained to lawyers and economists how infrastructure dependencies created leverage. I testified in depositions, translated engineering concepts into legal language, and watched as the case built momentum. When the settlement was announced, it was significant. Not just fines but structural changes. New requirements for IP documentation. Restrictions on non-compete agreements in tech. Mandatory disclosures about technical dependencies. The press called it a landmark case. I called it a good start. 5 years later. The email came from an unexpected source. A graduate student at MIT. Professor Keaton, I'm writing my thesis on power dynamics in technical organizations. Your case study is central to my research. Would you be willing to be interviewed? Professor. The title still felt strange. I'd accepted a part-time position at the university 2 years earlier, teaching a course on infrastructure architecture and intellectual property. The students were brilliant, curious, and hungry for knowledge that wasn't in the standard curriculum. I taught them the technical skills, yes. But I also taught them the human skills. How to document their work. How to negotiate contracts. How to recognize when they were being undervalued. How to walk away when necessary. My most popular lecture was titled, Section 4, Subsection C, The Art of Protecting Your Work.